Welcome to Food for Your Mind, episode 9, the YouTube show where I review fast food and books in tandem. Today, I'm going to be reviewing Eat, Pray, Love and the Wendy's grilled chicken sandwich. This is number 9, if you're keeping track at home. And this is a very, very special episode of Food for Your Mind because this is my first episode featuring a guest star, one Bob Peachey. Bob, do you want to introduce yourself to our vast audience?
I am Bob Peachey. I am an attorney, an environmental attorney, and probably not coincidentally, also one of the most frequent commenters on the different YouTube spots for Food for Your Mind. I'm a big fan of the show. On behalf of all your legions of fans, I'd like to congratulate you on the birth of your son.
Yes, indeed, that has happened. If you've noticed that I haven't been appearing in these videos quite as frequently as before, I do have a son. I'm a dad now, so sometimes that has to take priority over the reviews. But hopefully I am going to round out the menu. I do want to do the last 2 at least.
I'd also like to say, as a member of your fan club, as indeed the president of the Food for Your Mind fan club, you've done the corrections. You've done Anna Karenina, you've done The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, and you've now done Eat, Pray, Love.
It's true. It's a very wide-ranging panoply of literature that we've addressed on this program.
Right. One thing we've noticed is each one of these books has appeared on that well-known Chicken Soup for the Soul book club, Oprah's book club, and I just need to know, I mean, if you're going to continue to do Oprah's books on this show, when are we going to get your thoughts on The Road by Cormac McCarthy?
Oh.
When are we going to hear about A Million Little Pieces by James Frey? We need to get to these books. We need to hear
honestly,
Henry's thoughts.
I've read A Million Little Pieces. I think it's my least favorite book.
Even worse than...
even worse than The Night Ocean, which I gave a 2. A Million Little Pieces is literally like a 0. It is the worst book I've ever read.
Well, you've heard it here, folks.
Yeah, you heard it here first. We usually do the sandwiches first on this show, so let's dig in, shall we?
Let's go for it.
Let's see what we got here. Just take a look. I was thinking this was going to be mayo on it. It looks more like a kind of some kind of like
vegan
brown
Caesar
orange sauce. This is a little early for me, so if I'm not quite as ravenous as I typically am on this show, that's why.
The bun has a nice, reflective sort of sheen to it.
Oh, look at it, folks. It's a little dry, I have to say. That's the first thing that jumps out at me.
I'm getting hints of Thousand Island dressing in this sauce.
Now, if you've been paying attention to the program over the course of these many episodes, you know that I've been trying to connect the book with the fast food choice for that particular week. This, I thought, Eat, Pray, Love is kind of a self-help type, not a self-help type book, I guess, but like a book about finding yourself and, trying to live a healthier, happier life. And so I thought the healthier choice at Wendy's would, pair well with that.
Unfortunately, there is no pasta option at Wendy's. Otherwise, you would see us here gorging ourselves on pasta and pizza and whatever else Miss Gilbert has in Italy.
The dressing's not too bad.
Burgerville, which is a fast food restaurant chain up in the Pacific Northwest, they have a secret fry sauce, and the secret to the sauce is that they just take mayonnaise and stir it up with some ketchup. Really good stuff.
Yep, that sounds good.
There's a lot of food. I normally don't eat this much food.
Yeah, I think maybe I've got enough to give my numerical score. I'm gonna stop at the halfway point. I think that wasn't really that good. I think I'm gonna give it a 4. The dressing was okay. The chicken itself was not very good. It was pretty dry and pretty processed. Bob,
Yeah.
how do you weigh it?
I'd have to agree on that. I think that it was a missed opportunity to really emphasize the chicken, but it was just very bland. The sauce was really the only exciting thing about it for me. For the fries, of course, you have that Wendy's quality, and I will always have a love for Wendy's because I was at a summer camp as a kid learning how to sail, and we came across a lake house, which turned out to be Dave Thomas's. He was not home at the time, but his caretaker offered us up some frozen patties and grilled them up. So I'll always have a soft spot for Wendy's. But I tell you, they just can't do a chicken sandwich to save their life. So I'd say yes, a 4. I concur.
All right, unanimous. 4s all around. Let's turn away from the fast food and embrace some more intellectual fare. That is the world of books. Now, this book, Eat, Pray, Love, is pretty popular, I'd say. Bestseller. It's got 1 million copies sold, I think. And it's about how you can have a happy life, specifically if you're a kind of mid-30s, very professionally successful white woman, how you can travel around the world, seeking the meaning of everything. And so in that spirit, I thought I would try to condense down some, what I call Henry's rules for a happy life. Number 1, accept reality. 2, recognize that nothing, relationships, career, or whatever, is really going to change your mental and emotional state all that much. Number 3, find a creative outlet. This is one that she's obviously doing because she wrote this book. And was a pretty successful travel writer before. I wanted to talk very briefly about how exactly someone secures this job of travel writer. I'll ask you, Bob. Consider this as a potential career. Someone else is going to pay you to travel, and then you will write about it. Do you think that you could do that?
I think I could because I enjoy traveling. I enjoy trying to convey the sense of wonder at seeing new things for people who might not otherwise have that opportunity. However, the tricky thing about it is, and this is what happens in this book and that Ms. Gilbert would acknowledge, is that it's always filtered through your own perspective.
Though she's not a terrible writer, I would say she's certainly not the best in the world. So I started asking myself, how exactly did she get this job? There's lots of people out there who want to be travel writers. How did she become one? To some extent, like everything, it's the victory of the most well-connected. It's also victory of the most goes to the most charming. Sometimes, to get that job of like a travel writer for magazines and make a living doing that, you have to have the ability to charm literally every human being that you encounter. You've got to have the ability to very quickly convince anyone that yes, you are the person who should be getting paid to do this, and not the thousands of other people who would like to get paid to do it. And the other side of that is people who are very charming, and apparently she does make the claim in the book several times, I can make friends with anyone. And I believe her. I think that she can. But I think that there has to be something below the charm to actually make a relationship work. And I think that is the problem that she consistently runs into in this book. Number 4, remove yourself from capitalism. She attempts to do that away in the book and getting out and living in the ashram, living a very simple life. But of course, we all know she's just going to go back to Manhattan at the end of this, or wherever the fuck she lives, and go back to, buying her $15 hamburgers and whatnot. 5, cultivate a moderate self-appraisal. Try to think of yourself as being okay, rather than really good or really, really bad. There's certainly some parts in this book where she's, bewailing her own wickedness. And though she's not a great person, she's not the worst in the world. And the best attitude to have towards oneself is, you know what, maybe I'm okay. Maybe I'm good enough. Not great, not terrible. And 6, I would say, find your own path. Don't worry about what other people have to say too much. Bob, what were your general thoughts on Eat, Pray, Love?
We could sit here and criticize this book as privileged or privileged literature, which has been defined as literature or media whose expressed goal is one of spiritual, existential, or philosophical enlightenment, which is contingent upon women's hard work, commitment, and patience, but whose actual barriers to entry are primarily financial. This is better explored by Jacinda Sanders and Anna Mayus in an article from Bitch Magazine. Definitely take a look at that. Eat, Pray, Love is definitely exposed to that kind of criticism, but we don't need to get into that here. We could criticize how Ms. Gilbert has a tendency to characterize entire countries off of a certain value. So, of course, she says that Italians love to eat and enjoy pleasure and things like that, and Indians love to pray, and it's always very distasteful for me when somebody takes a nation and says that all of the people in it are somehow the embodiment of a certain ideal. Keep in mind that nations are imagined communities, and these types of differences, whatever truth they might have on the ground, they're really just forms of propaganda to keep people separated from each other. There's a very interesting moment in the book where one of her friends chides her, and she says, well, it's interesting that you're going to all these countries that start with the letter I. Why didn't you just pick to go to Iran and Ivory Coast and Iceland? That seems like a missed opportunity. That would have been a fascinating book. I'm sure you could just as easily find enlightenment in Venice as you could in Varanasi. And I would have loved to see the John Bolton review of the book on Iran. So missed opportunity there. Lastly, Henry's touched on this a bit. We could get into her hackneyed style and her clumsy writing. She has some very clumsy analogies at times.
Yes, pathetic analogies.
Yeah.
Analogies in which she compares something that's actually cool and interesting to something that's stupid.
There's as you probably know if you've read the book, she starts an affair with a guy named David in New York City, and she compares. The line from the book is that she clung to David to escape from her marriage as if he were the last helicopter pulling out of Saigon. And I thought it was very odd to compare her marriage to one of the great imperial war crimes of the 20th century. So that's it. It's a very interesting comparison for Miss Gilbert, someone who has a BA in political history from NYU. You'd think she could have thought through that a little bit better. But again, we haven't come here to bury Miss Gilbert. We've come to praise here. Henry's touched a little bit on her writing style and certain good qualities about it. I think that she builds in some... She tries to avoid some of these criticisms that I've just laid out by these certain asides where she has some self-criticism. I do think that her mini travelogue on Bali was fascinating. I didn't know a lot about Bali coming into this book, and I thought that she did a very nice job of a short history, a little potted history of Bali. The people there seemed wonderful and interesting. I do think that she has an excellent description on the difficulties in the process of meditation, which is something I practice daily, but I think that the kind of problems people can face in practicing meditation and her moment in the ashram where she meditates, she practices Vipassana meditation for an hour and she's attacked by mosquitoes. I think that's a very effective description of meditation. I had one question for Henry before I brought up another point here. My question for Henry was, there's a figure in the ashram named Richard from Texas, and a common theme in these types of books, in a lot of popular literature, is, I guess I'd like to call them the wise Southern figure, the wise Southern trope.
Mm-hmm.
And I've
National Southerner, even maybe sometimes.
I've learned a lot about Southern culture from Food for Your Mind and from Henry's videos in general.
It's true.
And I wish that I had come from a part of the country where we had a reputation for saying magical, wise things like, "Oh, it's too bad you have your wishbone where your backbone is," and things like that. What was it like to grow up in a place with such wisdom in the air? And
well, I mean, there are a lot of those kind of funny like folk expressions and stuff, but like remembering back to the people that I grew up with, I would not describe these people as like real sages or philosophers. They were more into like pickup trucks and baseball caps and stuff. So no, Southerners are people too. Bob, I wanted to ask you, what did you make of the title?
what was interesting was that like you, I came into this thinking this was going to be some kind of guide to how to live. And these were 3 admonitions. You gotta eat, you gotta pray,
Yes, these are the things that people need to do to have a happy and successful life.
Right. I didn't have any notion of what this would be about coming into this. I didn't realize it would start out with her on the floor of her bathroom crying over her terrible marriage. So it was a bit jarring that the title had such a lightness to it, a sort of charm, and then to go through really some dark times, and then to have her just in Italy gorging on things, and then going to the ashram and praying, and it was interesting how a lot of the lessons that I got from the book were not nearly as direct as I was expecting from the title. They were gleaned mostly from the themes that you had to work your way through in order to get to it. So it was not nearly as simple a matter as the title led me to believe.
What my take on the title is that she's kind of trying to make the claim that these three things are all parts of the same thing. First of all, eating. Meow. All right. This is my cat, by the way. Has the same name as me, Henry the cat. First thing I say, you can't consume your way out of your problems, and I would say they're your desires and what is best for you may not be pointing in the same direction. Just as she goes to Italy, she's eating all this heavy food for months and months and months, and you know what? She starts gaining weight. And I don't give a damn how much weight anybody gains, but she's she's unhappy about this because she's an upper class or middle class white woman. That's it's kind of the same way with love. I feel like sometimes people want to be with people who aren't who they should be with. That's their instinct about the situation, but that's not really what should happen. Everyone eats. You have to eat to stay alive. Not everyone prays. I do some kind of bargaining with the universe sometimes. Don't really do much prayer. And I would say you have to love something or someone to keep yourself going through the day. So eat yes, love yes, pray maybe skip it. Would be my advice. You already touched on her divorce rather briefly. She seems to be totally in the wrong. It seems like it's pretty much totally her fault. I think that's what she concludes over the course of the book, is that she concludes that it's her fault. And this is what I was talking about, how, we all have an idea of ourselves as basically like a good person. And sometimes you come into certain situations in life where you're not going to be the good person. You're going to be the person who fucks somebody else over. Imagine this being reversed, the genders being reversed. And going into family court, she would have taken him for everything he was worth.
Yeah, that relates to something that one of the troubles I had with my particular edition of the book. So Henry asked me to read this book. I misheard him and thought that he wanted me to have it read by. This was back in September, so I think he asked me on Friday to read the book. I had it read by Monday because I thought we were going to film this on Monday. So the edition of the book that I got was the 10th anniversary edition. And it's important that if you're going to read this book that you either decide between this one or the 10th anniversary edition, because the 10th anniversary edition has a preface that relates to this whole issue with the divorce. And she pretty much gives the game away. Throughout the book, she talks about the pressure that she feels as a young woman to have children. And that's sort of an abiding concern that she'll bring up from time to time, but it's not, she doesn't give it quite the emphasis that she does when you read this preface. So I just to say that there are spoilers ahead. There is a part in this preface which, if you read this preface before you read the book, you're going to read the book with this theme in mind. The issue is the pressure that young women feel to have the decision whether or not to have children. So that's an abiding concern that she had. Without saying it in the main text of the book, her concern is that it's all leading in that direction, and she plainly doesn't want that to happen. However, in the preface, she recounts a scene from Italy, which essentially she has that moment of enlightenment. And I'd like to read that portion from the book.
Go for it.
This is a story that I think if she had published this book today, she would have included, but didn't in the original, and I think it's revealing that she didn't include it in the original, but for her to put this in the preface really, again, gives the game away. So she says, "It happened when I was in Italy. I was taking the train from Florence to Bologna." I don't know how to to say that.
I think that's how it is.
It's a quick ride, less than an hour. I shared a compartment with an exhausted young mother and her rambunctious toddler. I could see that the woman, much as she adored her child, was plumb worn out from traveling alone with him. But I was not worn out that day, and I found the child charming, so I jumped in to try to give her a chance to read her book in peace. During the duration of the train ride, the Bambino and I played peekaboo, patty cake, and I've got your nose. We went through every object in my bag as though excavating an archaeological site. I let him scribble my journal, I allowed him to try my glasses, we pointed objects in the window, and I practiced my Italian nouns with them. She continues to have this train ride with them, and so finally when they get to their final train stop, I helped the woman disembark. She had all her own luggage to manage, plus a stroller, plus all her baby's gear. I carried the child out onto the platform while the woman got herself organized. Then we gave each other a kiss goodbye and they went to catch their next train. I watched them walk away, this devoted young mother who was around my age and her gorgeous and impossible handful of a son. Then I turned around and walked in the opposite direction. A solo young woman carrying only her backpack, ready to spend a few days in Bologna, doing nothing but eating pasta and practicing her Italian. The sun was warm on my face. It was a beautiful day. I was deliriously happy. And that was the moment when I knew I would never have a child of my own. I could love children. I could delight in children. I could help other women take care of their children, but I would never have one myself. I was literally and emotionally heading in a different direction. I was going off to become something else in this world. I did not yet know what, but not a mother. It was a glorious moment. Now this is important because, frankly, I don't think I've ever had that kind of social pressure or any kind of personal pressure I've put on myself in my life to have children. I've never had to face that question. To me, that's always seemed like something almost like a lifestyle decision. Eat, pray, love. It's something that I could freely choose whether or not to do. But this to me was probably the best part of the book was she talks a lot in interviews about how the book's about finding your agency and realizing who you are and so on and so forth. But the driving element of that is really socially conditioned. It's only since the 1970s that a lot of women have gone from working in the home or raising children and things like that in this sort of traditional lifestyle to being forced to go out and find work or to go out and live on their own and create a life apart from men. And fundamental to that is this pressure whether or not to have children. And that's something that, again, I've never had to grapple with, but to watch someone go through that struggle. In the original text, again, it's something that's really subdued, but to have that preface there and read the whole book through that lens of her grappling with that question, I thought was interesting. But again, I only wish that they had not included that as a preface, but rather as an epilogue. I think it would have been more useful for them to have people read the original text and then find that story at the end and think, aha, that's exactly what was the thread that was running throughout the whole book.
So is it your view that all women should be forced to have children, or should they not have to?
You know, it's something that is a woman's own decision, and there's nothing that there's all sorts of pressures in society for women to do that or not to do that, and I think that the useful thing about this book is to see that that's a struggle that women deal with, and we need that men in particular, but society in general, need to be sensitive to.
Something tells me that if Elizabeth Gilbert had a child, even that child would be exhausted by her. Like she would be too much even for it, I think.
I think that most of the characters in the book, apart from her sister, who actually I find vivacious and very interesting, most of the characters in the book are only interesting to her insofar as they answer some question she has about herself. She'd be a difficult mother to have if you as a child were just there to satisfy some urge that she had about herself, rather than treating someone treating a child as an end in themselves and as an independent person that you should be there to support.
To kind of close out my analysis of this book, I wanted to talk about the scam that is almost perpetrated against Elizabeth Gilbert towards the end of the novel. This is in Indonesia, I guess in Bali, where she befriends a holistic healer, I guess would be her kind of massage therapist type person. And Elizabeth Gilbert, over the course of becoming friends with this woman, who, like, is raising not only her own child without her husband, but also a couple of other kids that she has taken in. And Elizabeth Gilbert says, I'm going to buy you a house. And she raises money on, was it Kickstarter or GoFundMe or something like that?
Yeah.
Or something like she just asked people for it. It was her birthday. It was her birthday.
She had a Rolodex of friends that she could reach out to for money.
Mm-hmm. And so she gathers up together enough money for this woman to buy a house. And there's a kind of strange period where she's having trouble finding exactly just the right spot, and no, this doesn't have the right feng shui. And she goes back to Elizabeth Gilbert and is like, I think that, like, the Great Spirit is telling me that I should actually have a restaurant in addition to a house. And so she tries to get, like, I think it's like 3 times as much money out of Elizabeth Gilbert, like more than she has. And eventually she realizes that, well, you know what, this person's scamming me. This person's just trying to get as much out of me as possible. Well, first of all, consider this. Consider the amount of money that poor Balinese woman was trying to choke out of Elizabeth Gilbert, and consider how much money this book made. This book probably made 100 times what she was asking for. So who's really scamming who here?
I think this book might have outsold The Art of the Deal.
It was hugely successful.
Yeah. Well.
And also I would say, like, you know, when you're like a person who's living in not the third world, but the global south, as I think we're supposed to call it now, and you're dealing with a first worlder, are you obliged to be honest with them? Are you obliged to be entirely fair? If, like, Brock Lesnar, for example, and me got into a fight, and at a certain point in that I, like, tried to gouge him in the eye, or, like, knee him in the balls or something, I don't think anyone would really blame me for doing that, because in that context, that actually is fair.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite parts of the book. Elizabeth Gilbert has her own objectives. She has her own purposes with each one of these countries. Each one of these countries and each one of these characters fulfills a need for her and fulfills some kind of vision of the world that she's imposed on them. So again, all Italians love pasta and love to hang out of windows and watch people walking around the marketplace. Everybody in India is meditating all the time. Everyone in Bali is beautiful and is practicing all sorts of wonderful ways to affect balance in their life and so on and so forth. What I loved about her getting scammed by this lady was that it was someone who was giving her the same treatment. They were using Elizabeth Gilbert for their own ends.
Exactly. She got Gilberted.
And the only reason this woman was in the book, I found, was that Elizabeth Gilbert was like, yo, game recognizes game. Mm-hmm. So she took me for a ride, just like I've taken all these other people for a ride. So
for me, that was kind of the climax of the book. I don't think it's the very, very end. There's a bit after that where she finally meets a guy who she thinks is going to be the guy. But no, yeah, for me, that is the bit of the book that most stuck with me was the Balinese scam artist. Yeah, who I think is great, and I would if it was a choice between hanging out with her or hanging out with Elizabeth Gilbert, I would certainly hang out with her. Even if she did try to scam me. Yeah, you know?
Yeah, me too.
Alright, well, I think I'm about ready to give this book a score. How about you, Bob?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm actually going to give this one the same score I gave The Sandwich Man. Give this one a 4.
So, I'm going to give this a 3. I also will add the caveat that, so I have a friend who when he gives these kind of rankings, he also discusses whether he's going to reread or rewatch that thing. I will give it a 3, and I don't think I'm going to reread Eat, Pray, Love. I read some pretty terrible books, which I've reread, and I think that says something about them artistically. I don't think that I need to revisit this anytime soon, but I'm glad I did. I feel like the millions of people who have read this, I feel like I have a closer connection with them as well.
Well, thank you very much for tuning in to another episode of Food for Your Mind. And thank you to Bob Peachey for being my guest this week.
Thank you for this opportunity.
We'll see you next week, folks.